My name is Dennis Gill with the Americans in Wartime Museum. Today's date is 30 July 2022. I'm in Virginia Beach, Virginia, interviewing Jay Okonek.
Yes, sir.
Got that right. All right. Appreciate you sitting down and talking with us, Jay. Give us a little bit of background on you. Where did you grow up? Where were you born? Things like that.
I was born in New Bern, North Carolina. I was raised in Farmville, North Carolina. I enlisted in Farmville, North Carolina, and or Greenville, North Carolina, and then I joined the Navy. That was January 17th of 2000.
2000.
Yep.
All right. Why the Navy?
They had bases where I thought it was cool near the coast. I love the beach, love the water, and that's where I wanted to be.
Okay.
So.
You have any other family members that were military?
My grandfather was a World War II vet. My grandfather on my mother's side was a World War II vet. My grandfather on my dad's side was a Korea vet, and my dad was in the Air Force.
Okay. And you joined the Navy.
Mm-hmm.
What war or conflicts you participated in?
Iraqi freedom, enduring freedom, all of them.
Right.
So all of that. I did 9 deployments from aircraft carriers. So 9 deployments, 3 of them were to the Gulf. Another 3 were to well, 4 were to the Gulf. Another 3 were to the Arabian Sea off the coast of Pakistan, and 1 was in 7th Fleet, which is Southeast Asia.
Right. What year did you enlist again?
2000.
2000. Okay.
Yep.
And what was your MOS?
I was a rescue swimmer, air crewman on H-60s.
Okay.
So.
Basic training was in Great Lakes?
Went to Great Lakes, then to rescue swimmer school, so you leave Great Lakes, you go to Pensacola, you go to aircrew school for a month. They teach you how to swim and attention to detail in the nicest manner possible. Then you leave there, you go to rescue swimmer school for 4 weeks, and they teach you how to swim a whole lot better, how to save people in the water, how to get them back into the aircraft, basic medical stuff. Then you go to AWA school, where they teach you some other parts of the job. For me, it was hunting submarines. That was one part of the job. Okay. Wasn't my favorite thing to do. And then once you get there, you get to pick your orders. And I picked San Diego, California. I picked a carrier-based squadron because they did combat search and rescue, and that was what I wanted to learn how to do. So you go to HS-10, or at the time it was HS-10, now it's HSC-3, and they taught us basics of how to fly the aircraft, how to get qualified, what to do, and you do that for 16 weeks. Once you're done with that, then you go to your first command. You get to your first command, you have a very basic level of training, and they start ramping you up into better medical, better rescue swimming techniques, they start teaching you guns, weapons. Those are your first weapons quals for the Navy. For a rescue swimmer, how to shoot, how to be a door gunner, how to be a crew chief, and all the helicopter stuff as well as the in-water stuff is all maintained while you're out there training for that. I got there in, I want to say it was June or July of 2001, and I had been there. I checked into HS-8 at the time, and then September 11th happened. When September 11th happened, I was actually still living on base, and I was driving across base. I was listening to a CD player. It wasn't even listening to the radio or anything else like that. And it's California, we're 3 hours behind, and I was like, man, there's no traffic today. And so I pulled in, and they were like, you're here, go upstairs, go to the ready room. And I was like, what's going on? They're like, don't you listen to the radio or watch the news? And I was like, no. So I walked into the ready room, and they had it on the TV. I walked in, I saw the towers fell, and then we got the warning order to be on mass casualty alert. The funny part about that day that I remember about September 11th is, even on the West Coast, after they canceled all the flights and everybody was back, we were one of 3 aircraft that were actually flying that day, waiting on an alert call. And normally air traffic control is loud. It's all over the radios, it's constant, and we heard nothing, not a peep from anybody except for the 2 other aircraft that were actually flying that day, and those were jets that were flying combat air patrol up and down the coast. Shortly after September 11th, our carrier sortied. We did a quick 3 weeks up to Fallon to finish our training, and then we went over and we spent the next 7 months off the coast through Operation Anaconda, supporting operations that were going on in Afghanistan. We flew a crap ton of hours out there, making sure the jets went off and took back. We had a detachment that went into Pakistan until they took, I think it was, I forget what the airfield, it was one of the airfields. They were waiting on the Air Force to move down, but they stood CSAR alert, nothing happened. Nobody's getting shot out of the sky during that time. And then, so it was a lot of plane guard, a lot of checking out boats, supporting special operators, taking out boats. We would fly them places when they would get intel, and we would drop them off on ships. They would do fast rope like you see on TV. It was all pretty cool, pretty fun stuff. And then we would watch them do their job from the helicopter and provide cover from the aircraft. So that deployment, the jets did a lot of work that way. We were kind of out of the fight. We didn't do a whole lot then. And then we went home. And then they told us, you have 90 days to be ready. Did my second deployment. My second deployment was a 7th Fleet deployment just off the coast and around Japan, filling in the hole for another carrier. There wasn't anything huge going on there. We were watching the war from Japan, and that was kind of it was a little disheartening because we wanted to be there. And then went home, had a nice little down period. We ramped up shortly thereafter, and then we went on cruise in 2005. 2005, we deployed to Iraq, the Arabian Gulf, and my squadron was chosen to go into Kuwait. We sat in Kuwait, and we provided intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance up and down the rivers and the pipelines, checking pipelines, convoy support, and troop transport, filling in holes for the Army in the southern half of Iraq. And that was where we did, I got over 20 combat flights in country. We would leave Kuwait every day, fly out, check the ABOT and KBOT, the oil plats that are out there off the coast, and then we would move north up the river or up one of the pipelines, and we would look for any changes or any support. And that was honestly some of the best, most exciting flying that I've ever done in my entire life. We flew. We're Navy. We don't understand why the Army flew at 3,000 feet, but we had a chance to be overland, so we went everywhere at 50 feet and 120 knots, so we could look everybody right in the eyes as we were going. We got to provide, some days when we were doing convoy support, we would see people, setting up IEDs or, counting convoys, providing intel for IEDs and stuff like that. And we would make radio calls. We'd go in. I was fortunate. I never had to shoot anybody. We got shot at a lot, but most of our ops were during the daytime. So we didn't get to, it's hard to see tracers during the day. Right. It wasn't until we actually, we were late from a mission. We got gas and we missed a window. We had to wait until dark, and we were flying out of Basra. And as we were leaving Basra, the pilot looks back and he goes, "Hey, you guys see fireworks back there?" And we're like, "No, those are tracers." Luckily, they were far enough behind us, but we got to see those. We got to see the tracers go up. We never realized until that point, because we were doing so much stuff in the day, and we were so low and so fast most of the time that you're a dumb kid. You don't even realize the danger you're in when you're out there looking around. Much less just being at 50 feet, and flying at those speeds with everything else that's out there. But I do remember that was one of the most. That was a good deployment, because out of a 7-month deployment, 5.5 of it was not on the boat. It was in country. And so that was just, you see the things you see from the air that you don't, I don't know whether people really get to appreciate. The guys on the ground are far more stressed than we were, and we're ultimately supporting them. But in between, in the transits, you see places that could be, absolutely beautiful, that are just destroyed. And that was always something that kind of bothered me. You see, people not nearly as fortunate as we are in the United States, and then you see the way they're treated, and you can't do anything from the helicopter but make radio calls, and that's sometimes kind of tough to think about. But I was happy with what we did over there. We did a lot of good work. I think we helped a lot of people. A lot of people made it to their next checkpoint safe because we were out there. And that's ultimately what being a rescue swimmer and an air crewman is all about, especially in a helicopter, is we always say so others may live. And that's what we do. So yeah, that was a 2005 deployment. That was my first really super rewarding deployment. I felt great coming back from that, like we had done something really awesome. And then shortly after that, since I was one of the few air crewmen that actually had combat experience, they recruited me for the weapons school. So I went to the weapons school and I taught weapons and aircraft tactics while we were there. And I did that for 3 years. And then the next one was HS4. HS4 was a great tour. It was a lot of fun. I was a new E6, so it was my first real leadership experience in the Navy. And I picked the hard squadron. Everybody told me, no, you don't want to go to HS4 at the time because, commands go in ebb and flows of good and bad. And they were at a low point. And I said, well, nowhere to go but up. So let's take that on. And so I went over there, and it was me and one other first class for a little bit. And then it was just me, solo E6 for a while. Towards the end, we got another one, but we went back on surge to the Arabian Gulf, and we sat off the coast of Kuwait. Didn't do a lot of stuff other than train in country because we were starting to slow down in 2008. The southern area was pretty well under control. So not a lot going on there. And then that was one deployment there. Came back, did another surge back to the Arabian Gulf again. And that was kind of the same story. We were just filling in, supporting the jets. And then one of my last deployments there, my fourth deployment there, my fourth deployment there was when Fukushima happened. The tsunami in Japan happened. We were actually supposed to pull into port the day we got notified that the port was canceled. And it's funny, I called my wife and I said, and this is something, it's not combat, it's just what we do. So I called the wife, I said, hey, cancel my hotel in Korea. And I was like, just watch the news, I'll call you in a couple of days once I get a chance to. And so we got on station off the coast of Sendai in Fukushima, and we immediately went out and started searching debris between the ship and the coast, looking for bodies, survivors. Which, if you've never seen a post tsunami ocean or environment, especially from that one, that is something that is absolutely awe-inspiring in not the best way. Tons of debris. There were people in there. There's nothing you can do about it. We weren't focusing on recovering bodies at the time or anything else like that. Whole houses floating in the water. We did see a dog on top of a roof. And then we got the call to go in. So we went in, we picked up food from a Japanese supply ship on the way in, and we started delivering food. And the next 3 weeks was taking food into radioactive environments, delivering it to the people in the areas surrounding Fukushima. The Japanese, to their credit, were super prepared for a natural disaster. The devastation and the amount of loss was pretty hard to take. Every day, you're flying over a new area and you see new things, new recovery efforts, different things going on. That was pretty tough, but that was something that, in spite of all that, we knew what we were doing. We delivered over 3 million pounds of goods to more than 20 different sites. and supported the Japanese. I think one of the funniest things was once we ran out of Japanese food, we had to teach them how to use MREs, which to a standard military person is no big deal, right? You know how to use an MRE. But they didn't understand how to use the MREs. So somewhere out there's a video of me sitting in a gymnasium floor with about 20 Japanese people around me, all with their phones out, and I'm showing them how to mix the heater packets and put the food in and everything else. And that was something that was really funny. But that was one of the rewarding things, because I actually got to interact more than just dropping the food off and taking it into buildings or whatever. So the Herculean effort that the Navy and the squadrons did on that, I mean, we pulled, I think it was total more than 19 ships. At one point, the aircraft carrier had 15 helicopters sitting on its deck being loaded at one point to take relief stuff in. My squad, like I said, my squadron alone did 3 million pounds. They did 2 medevacs during that time. I was in the other bird, so I got to watch the people get a medevac. And yeah, that was the humanitarian aid was the mission is always one of those things that's super rewarding. Yeah, and then got back from that, and then at that point I'd been in almost 11 years. Got back and we were doing some training, and we were training with the Special Boat Team 12 out on the West Coast, and that was where I got my first rescue. So that was pretty cool. We took off to go do a beach hit. They were going to hit the beach, and we were going to provide intelligence and surveillance for the beach hit into the training site. And so as we're leaving, oddly enough, it's raining in San Diego in April, and the pilot goes, "Hey, today'd be a great day for a rescue story. It's raining in San Diego." And I was like, "Nah, you got me in the bird, sir. We don't get rescues with me in the bird. Like I don't have that luck." And he's like, whatever. So we were Dash 2 in a 2-plane go. We had all kinds of ammo on the bird, and we get out to San Clemente Island where the boats are supposed to meet us. And we're at the rendezvous, and we're in a high buoy, low buoy orbit, and our boats are late. So I was a crew chief. I was a senior air crewman on the flight, and I had 2 other crewmen with me who were my door gunners, and then we had the 2 pilots up front, and we were just sitting there BSing while we were waiting, looking around and scanning the beach, and then I said, you know what? I was like, tune up Maritime 16 and see if we can hear them on the radio. They should have been here 30 minutes ago. Right. So as soon as we turn on the radio, we hear Rib 205, vessel in distress, requesting immediate medevac support. And so I heard that call, and I was just like, that's our boat, go. And they said they were 20 miles north of Wilson Cove, and the Coast Guard was chiming in, and rescue swimmers have a moderate rivalry between Navy and Coast Guard rescue swimmers, because they get a lot of glory in movies made, and right. We don't. So Top Gun, we were the real heroes in Top Gun. So I said, hey, let's go. And so the skipper of the squadron was actually in the bird, who was high buoy above us, and my pilot just peeled out and put the throttles to the wall, and we were opening at 120 plus knots, and the skipper said he looked down, and we were like half a mile away, and he looked up and started making another orbit, and then he looked down again, and we were 10 miles in opening, just getting it. And he goes, Black Knight 614, where are you guys going? We're like, oh yeah, we got a vessel in distress. We're going to get a rescue right now, and we're gonna go get a medevac. And the skipper, he called back. He goes, I'm not gonna tell you no, but generally you ask before you just go do something. And my pilot radios back. He's like, yes sir, I'm sorry. Can we please go execute the rescue? And he goes, carry on. And so skipper starts making his way over, and it was a sea state of 4, so it's not the seas weren't 4 foot, it was a sea state of 4, which is between 10 and 20 foot rolling surf, and the boat he was on was an 11 meter rib, so it was 33 foot long, so the waves are rolling almost as tall as the boat is, And this poor guy's down there with a head, neck, and chest injury because his 50 cal had blown up on him. And he was hypothermic. Those were all the radio calls that we got. And I was trying to decide if I wanted to put my rescue swimmer on the boat at the time. But we had worked with these guys before. So I was like, they know our litter procedures. So I was like, we'll just send the litter down because there's not a lot of space on the boat. It's rocking. We'll send the litter down, get our guy up. We'll take him to the hospital. Everything's good. And that was the plan we all worked out. So pilot pulls into a nice little hover. I said, hey, try and get 5 knots on the boat, get 5 knots on the bird, and I'll put it right down there. Well, that part goes pretty successfully. It hits the deck on the boat. They don't actually grab the litter, and the boat takes a dive, and it goes between the gun mounts and the radio mast on the aft landing of the boat. And I watched all my cable go just tight. It just went as tight as a bungee cord, and it's, cable's supposed to hold 1,200 pounds.
Right.
And it went tight. The whole bird kind of shook a little bit. It knocked my MVGs off and my goggles that I had on under them to keep the water out of my face. And so there's a brief pause in the action there, and I was like, okay, I'm just gonna pay out cable, everything's good. And then so finally I'm like, all right guys, take it, disconnect it, dump the hook over the side, I'll send it back to you when you're ready, package the patient. So I'm talking to the boat guys, and the boat guys are like, what do we do? I was like, we did this last week. Like, what do we do? And so I key up the radio and I start talking them through, all right, make sure, maintain C-spine. I'm talking them through it on the radio. All the while I'm giving my, hey, forward 20, forward 40, keeping the pilot on top of the boat because he can't see it. He's doing it blind. Right. In 20 knots of wind. We got the sea state going. It's cloudy and rainy. Literally one of the worst conditions you could ever do. And we're just trying to get through it. So we talked the guy completely through it and get him back on there. I get the hook back on there. I've got my patient in there. He's already hypothermic. And the next thing I know, I'm like, all right, you guys are rocking. I was like, I'm going to try and time it. Just get out of the way when I tell you I'm going to take him off the deck. And so the pilots are like, okay. The guys on the boat are like, okay. And so I start raising it up, and I timed it good, but I had a bit more cable paid out, and it comes off the deck right as they're starting to go down the backside of the wave, and he swings about 15 feet and goes right into the water. And I'm just like, I am willing the hoist to go faster than it could possibly go to just see him come out of the water. Well, he was knocked out, but the cold California water apparently woke him up when he got splashed pretty good. And so we get him into the aircraft, start checking him out. I'm like, hey man, I got to cut your dry suit off. Just so you know, we're going to get you warmed up. And they start booking it back to California. So we book it back to as we're booking it back to California, we're cutting the dry suit off the guy, and he's just got swim trunks on under it. It's 50-degree water, it's 50-degree air. So no wonder he was hypothermic, and then plus with the head wound and all that other stuff. That was kind of a busy night, but it was a fun night because we got to do our job.
What you were trained for.
Yeah, and that was a fun night. Kind of live for those nights a lot. And then after that, I pretty much checked out, went to HSC3, which is the training squadron. HSC3, I got to do another really rewarding mission. I was instructing people out there. That was great. I was training the next air crewman. And in the middle of that, we were learning how to fight fires from the helicopter. Not something you would think the Navy would do, but we were there to support. We had Bambi buckets. And so over my time at HSC3, there were 2 major fires that we took part in helping stop, or that I took part in helping stop. There were more fires than that. I just wasn't on the flight schedule on some of those days. But that is honestly one of the coolest things that you can do, because you're a bomber, and you're a bomber from 150 feet, and you just fly over, and you got to time that 2 seconds from the time you push the button to the time the bucket opens up, and then you'll go from there. And so we fought fires up in Malibu. We put out a couple of fires up in Malibu, and then one of the last ones I did before I left HSC3 was a fire in Santa Onofre and on Camp Pendleton out in California, and that was pretty freaking cool. Being up there with the Marines and interoperability and everything else, because Cal Fire has people that are like forward air controllers, and they're supposed to control all the planes, but he couldn't handle the number of helicopters that were, because the fire was coming over the hill, going down to Camp Pendleton's airfield, and it was going to hit the fuel farm. And if it hits the fuel farm, that's not a good day for anybody. And the Cal Fire dude couldn't handle the amount of air traffic and everybody that was there, so he just like climbed for the skies and boned out, and was like everybody just orbit. And then I watched a brand new, the Yankees, the Huey, the new Hueys had just come out, the 4-bladed ones had just come out, and I watched this dude who was a Ford Air Control qualified. He just peeled out of the orbit from everybody else, and he was, I forget his call sign, it was Viper or something like that. Even Marines get all the cool call signs. But he rolls out of it, and he's all, this is Viper, whatever. I have tactical control, and he starts climbing up, and he goes, starting with the guy over the fuel farm right now, radio in. And that dude started radioing, everybody started radioing in. He had us all organized within like 2 seconds, and we were all back to dropping water on the fire, and we were able to stop the fire from getting to the fuel farm right at the dry riverbed right before it made it to the fuel farm. Because Camp Pendleton uses bladders, they don't actually have tanks, so the fire would have just eaten right through it, and then they would have had all that jet fuel just going. But yeah, so that was something cool I got to do at HSC 3, and then HSC 7 went back to the Arabian Gulf. We worked in the Med for a little bit before we went back to the Arabian Gulf, while Syria was going on. Supported those, got to see lots of Russian boats. That was my first Med cruise. I had been West Coast my whole time before, and I'd seen Russian ships, but never, like, it's different on the East Coast. You're like, you look at China when you're over there, and you look at, a bunch of other little countries. You don't often get to run into Russia too much. When you go to the East Coast, it's different. It was much more like the Cold War was still there, intermixing fleets and sailing close to each other and stuff like that. And then they said, hey, you need to move down because we still have to support Iraq. So we went down and we supported Iraq, and did that and came back. And we came back from that deployment, and then Hurricane Harvey happened. And that was probably my proudest leadership moment. I had worked really hard in my previous career to develop a reputation that was good. Right. People trusted me, and my skipper actually trusted me with putting together the crew to go down to Texas and start making rescues happen. It was a long 3 days. I remember we were all prepped and ready. We had the warning order and everything else, and we were waiting to go. And I was actually at my daughter's soccer game, and I got the phone call. They're like, "Hey, we got authorization. We're leaving, so you need to get here." Ran home, grabbed my bag, drove to the squadron, pulled into the squadron, basically just jumped out of the car, and we walked out to the planes, grabbed all our stuff, and we were in the helicopters for a day getting to Dallas. And then we got to Dallas. In Dallas was too far, so we came up with a plan for taking multiple crews down there to avoid violating crew rest or anything else. Safety was always a top concern, and we flew down to Houston. So once Texas Task Force 1, our liaison got there, and we got everything ironed out. So we went down to Houston, and when we got to Houston, it was day. I put myself on the night. I had my day crews go, put the less experienced crews during the day, and then at night they went out, did some great work clearing casualty collection points for people who were evacuating certain flooded areas in Houston. At that point, Harvey wasn't like, it was already we had the weaker band going over top during the day, so you had pretty decent viz. It wasn't all that bad, but it was getting worse. And then it came time to do the nighttime swap. The nighttime swap was fun. The wind was blowing at about 45 miles an hour. We had about a quarter mile of viz, and we only had about 300-foot ceilings, which not a lot of room to play in a fairly large helicopter. And the plan was to go and start emptying out a school that was starting to be flooded on the north side of Houston. So we left. We went over there. There were 253s that were already there that were emptying out. The Coast Guard called it done for the night. And some of the Army National Guard units had said they weren't going back out. It was too dangerous. But we just made the call to keep going, that we weren't going to leave people out there overnight. Some people had said it was foolish, but we went over to the school. The 53s were there. They could only fit one more aircraft in there. Water was rising in the school, so we just sent Dash 2 down, and we said, we'll go and keep an eye out from up here and see what else we can do. And as they heard us, still raining, the neighborhood still had people in it, and and so we saw lights start flashing in the neighborhood. It was pretty full. Water was about waist deep. We was starting to go into some of the houses rather than just sit on their front porches and stuff like that. And we knew it was time to try and help these people get out before it got any worse, because it was still raining really hard. So found one house. As we pulled into a hover, I went down, and as I'm going down the hook, helicopter's blowing, the wind's blowing, everything else, and I see somebody stick their head out the door, and I'm like, just wait. And then so I go in, and I get to the door, and as I get to the door, they try and open it, but the wind is like got the door and it's like jammed it shut, and so I had to kick in the door to get inside. And then when I got inside, they had a woman who had a dialysis machine. There was a woman with the dialysis machine. It was a mom, a dad, 3 kids, and then grandma. And then the grandma had the dialysis machine, so I had to figure out how to get her machine, everyone else out through the water and into the bird. The bird was still hovering. There was no safe place to land in there. And that was the first rescue we got that night. We picked all of them up, got them out, and then we decided to come back. The other bird was making its second run from the school, and we went back to the same neighborhood. And this time we decided it was too much for me to go back and forth to the bird the whole time, so I would just walk door to door rather than come back up to the bird with every single passenger, because some houses just had like dads had stayed home or moms had stayed home. A lot of families didn't actually stay together. Some people had gone earlier, and parents were just there holding on, trying to get stuff out. That was a hard decision to have to tell people, they want to bring their boxes, they want to bring this, they want to bring that. And I pretty much decided at that point, like as I got to the first house, on that second trip, I got to the first house and they wanted to bring a ginormous box of stuff. And I was like, take it back upstairs. It doesn't have a pulse. It's not coming with me. So started going door to door, grabbing people, filling up the bird. On that night, we did that trip to multiple different neighborhoods 4 more times that night before the weather got absolutely too bad. When the tornadoes showed up and the lightning started, and that we couldn't get any more gas anywhere, we decided to stop for the night. And that was we stepped into the bird at 1700, and we turned over with the daytime crew who was supposed to be napping to fly us back to Dallas at 1:30 or 2. And then we got back to Dallas about 3:30 or 4, and we swapped out with another crew that flew back. After that, we moved down to Houston proper, or actually College Station, because I was close enough we could operate out of there and they could support us. So we went down to College Station and we set up kind of like a fob at the airport in College Station. And then we started going back, and by this point we had Air Force PJs showing up, and they were like, we're going to take a boat. And I was like, well, my corpsmen are pretty run down. They've been going almost 24 hours straight with this stuff. Can you come with us? So the Air Force chopped over 2 PJs with us. Those dudes were amazing. Love working with those guys. There's some true professionals. And so by this point, Houston was pretty much drying out. The water was moving, but then we got the call that the levee broke in Beaumont. So we moved down. We flew from Houston to Beaumont, We went over to Beaumont. We started making rescues and having the PJ with us since my corpsmen were on other aircraft, and we all just basically went down. We had one operational channel. Everybody was coordinating it, and it turned into, you know, who can get the most people the fastest as we were all going through there. And so we got over an apartment complex, and at first I hoisted everybody down because we're just kind of feeling out the area and everything else, because we were using a dry spot in the road. The road was a little elevated. The apartment complex was kind of down. So I put my dude who was acting as a rescue swimmer that day, and then the PJ down, and I said, let's go get people out of this apartment complex that want to come. And he said, okay. So they went down there, and the rescue swimmer, you know, he was working the LZ. The PJ was triaging people as they were coming in, and we started making runs back and forth. And then I called the PJ up, and I was like, hey, you need to be on this Radio Freak. You're coordinating this LZ. We're going to get this apartment complex emptied out. And he said, roger that, senior, I got it. And he got in contact with the overall OIC, who was in a fixed wing C-130 above us, kind of coordinating air traffic. And so we booked it on back to the checkpoint, dropped off our passengers, came back. As we came back, we saw the Army had actually landed and made it into the LZ, and we're like, well, you know, we can't let the Army show us up. So we landed this time on the nice little dry spot, and we started making runs. The PJs and the rescue swimmer were bringing people out. Ingenuity in those kind of environments is kind of funny. You wouldn't think it, but an inflatable air mattress is a lifesaver, right? Because you can stack half a family on an inflatable air mattress, and you don't have to swim anybody. And so he was swimming people over. I'd get them in the berg, get them all strapped in, check them out, and then we would haul butt to the checkpoint and get them over there, and then drop them off. And I think, you know, like I said, I loved being in Iraq and doing the stuff we did there, but I also loved getting to give back a little bit, yeah, especially in our own country. That was something different that I never really considered when I became a rescue swimmer. I always thought I was going to be swimming around saving people or something like that. But then, yeah, that pretty much wraps up my active career. After that, I came back, got in a lot of trouble for going to REI and buying Gucci gear and winding up on TV, and then you know, I was pretty close to my twilight tour in my 20s, so I took a job at Naval Special Warfare, and then that's where I retired out of.
What did you do there?
I was the UAS maintenance director.
Okay.
So, just told people how to work on toy airplanes.
Gotcha.
So,
well, let me go back to the beginning of your career, September 11, 2001. When that day happens, I know there's a lot going on. Does the gravity of that moment sink in and what it would mean? I mean, we're not going back to Iraq or Afghanistan without that day.
I don't think I thought about it at the time. You know, I was at the point I wasn't even 21 yet. Yeah. I was 19 years old. I'd been in school for the Navy, and the gravity of the situation. I mean, there were people in tears, you know, watching it fall. But from a kid from North Carolina, you know, I didn't realize the gravity of the situation. It just meant we had a job to do. You know, we were on mass casualty alert for whatever may come. We still had planes that were waiting to land that needed somewhere to go, and the United States, for all intents and purposes, was closed. So it was just one of those things where it didn't hit me, and I didn't think about it until years later. Right. Everything that went on that day, the movements that went on that day, I mean, if you've ever been to San Diego and seen the harbor, it's Norfolk, a ship can go and you'll notice it, right? But it still looks pretty far away. When we took off in San Diego that day, San Diego Harbor is not nearly as big as the Chesapeake Bay, right, and there was a line of ships leaving the bay. If it could sail, it sailed, and it was leaving the San Diego Bay under the bridge. The carriers were going. Everybody was leaving San Diego Bay, and there was a line for at least 10 miles just getting out to sea in a hurry. And so that was just, I think back about that, and then, you think about, I was a trained gunner. It never occurred to me to why, like, get on the bird. We don't often fly unless we're training for something but we were flying around locked and loaded, ready in case something else happened. If there was a car going for the base, we were ready for that, and as a young kid, you don't really think about the impact of all that. I find that I actually, a lot of the stuff that I didn't think about at the time and I didn't realize is part of what comes back now. So the month after I retired, I had an aneurysm, probably due to hard landings and getting hit in the head and stuff like that a lot. And I find that I'm a little less likely to hold it down when I think about how heavy some of that stuff is. I remember one time, like, I was, in 2005 flying in country. I had a stupid little camera, and I was like, "Hey, Mom," and we're right on the border with Iran, and we're in a not nice part of Basra, and I'm like, "Hi, Mom," on the camera as we're flying around, and I got back and I was like showing her the video. I was like, "I made this video for you. Check this out." Right. And she's like, "You're in a war zone, Jay." I was like, yeah, you're right. Like, you don't think about that when you're a young kid. Everything's invincible, and then you start thinking about, recently, like with the helicopter crash that we recently had a helicopter crash in California, and we've had other helicopter crashes, and the reminder pops up every now and then, and they were operating in training. They were doing training when we lost, 3 crews over my career. We lost 3 crews, and they were friends, good pilots, good air crewmen. It's just, you just push it all down, and then you think about it later.
Yeah, well, you really can't think about it and do your job effectively.
No.
Right? I mean, it's not something you can think apart on.
Mm-mm. Not at all.
But you will think about it at some point.
Yeah, it does come back. Now that, when you're not under the stress of the job, whatever that job is, people say it gets less as you get higher. I think you just trade types of stress. You trade operational stress for leadership stress. Not that they don't mix, but there is a difference when you may not be in front of everybody all the time, or the first foot out the door all the time, but you're responsible for the people below you. And you sign the flight schedule every day, and you put crews together, and you go flying, and you're responsible for putting people in those situations and making those decisions. And so it's just it changes, and you don't really think about the gravity of those things until later. Yeah. And God forbid something happens and you're the one that signed it, right, or handed it to the skipper to sign in my case. So, yeah.
Is there one moment in your career that is a defining moment, or something that stands out? I mean, you did a lot. Is there anything you think about more than another?
I really look at my career. I look back on my career as a whole as an incredibly positive and rewarding thing. I had a very non-standard career for a rescue swimmer. There are guys in the Army who go 20 years and never fire a bullet. There are guys who just have stuff happen, and I just seem to be one of those guys for rescue swimmers. I just had stuff happen. Right. Right place at the right time. As far as the defining moment going, I don't think I look back on any one thing as being super defining. It was all steps leading me to a right direction. I think I look back on nights when, we have a sailor go overboard and we can't find him. I look back on missions that we could have done better. If there was somebody else, what we could have done more to be better. Could we have, found that person if kind of things, and you try to avoid the what ifs. That's what I find myself dwelling on a lot. Not so much, that's the heavy stuff. The positive stuff, I've got a wall of me up there. I like my air medals. I like my air medals. I think the most positive thing that I like is one of the last things that I did was I talked about Hurricane Harvey. So I got an air medal for that, but every single air crewman that I picked went with me, got an air medal too. And maintenance got awards too. We were awarded up and down for that because the team was right, the people were right, everything was right. And I think that's something that I look back on very positively because everybody worked. It was one of those things where it went, we did what we had to do, and things got done, and everybody came home safe, and that's ultimately the important thing. That's probably the bright shining moment. I think some of the other worst things, like, you walk in, everything was still pretty fresh around Basra. We'd been in it for 2 years, but it was still pretty fresh, and you walk in and you see where, you're dropping people off or coming back, and you see some of the horrible things, the evidence of some of the horrible things, the bloodstained pools, the things like that. Those are horrible to freaking think about, but they're in there. So you just think about the good more, and you think about the people. I think the people are the best. Great friends out of there. Don't want to lose any more of them. I'm happy I retired when I did, and I think it was a good time. But yeah, I think all of those things just culminate into one, and they just kind of come in and flow in and out like a river. You think of them and you kind of try and let them go.
Let's fast forward 100 years. Somebody might watch this video. What would you like them to know about your service?
I don't regret one bit of it, even the bad. What we did from September 11th to all the way, not just, me or anybody else, but what we did in Afghanistan and Iraq, and the massive amount of work that went in there, no matter what people say looking back, I saw that we did good there. And there's nobody that can tell me different, that they weren't better while we were there helping. And that's what I'd want them to look back and remember. Not that it was a financial burden and that there were recessions or whatever else. But girls were allowed to read. People were allowed to go to school. Freedoms were given, that kind of stuff. And I saw it. We were better for it. They were better for it. So that's what I'd like them to remember.
Anything else you'd like to document?
Nah, I think I about covered it.
Got it all?
Yeah.
All right. Well, on behalf of the Americans of Wartime Experience, I want to thank you very much for your service. That is not just a cliche. We mean it.
My pleasure.
And thank you very much for sitting down and talking to us. Thank you.